now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to start things off with Eubank Jr. versus Morrison. This was Chris Eubank Jr.'s first fight under the tutelage of Roy Levesta Jones Jr. And the crux of this fight, the focal point of it, wasn't whether or not Chris Eubank Jr. would win the fight. That was conceivable. The crux of it was, how does he look? How does he win the fight? Is he a different Chris Eubank Jr. than the one that he was with George Groves, than the one that he was with Matvey Korobov, and just every fight before he so decided to pair up with Roy Jones Jr.? Essentially, what you were looking for were differences.
What has Roy added to this fighter?
And I did see some additions. To say that there were shades of Roy and Chris Eubank Jr., well, that would be an understatement. Very clear, very obvious, very early that Roy's tutelage was rubbing off on young Chris in his posture, in his movements, his stance, leaping left hooks, things of that nature.
You definitely saw Roy's influence.
I want to say that Chris didn't look half bad out there. He didn't. Shades of what he used to do and shades of what he's trying to do. They didn't quite mesh straight away, and that's okay because not only was this Chris's first fight since December of 2019, the Matvey Korobov fight, not only was this his first fight in well over 12 months, more like 16 months, not only was this Chris's first fight off a very long layoff, but it was his first fight under the tutelage of Roy Jones Jr., thus you can't expect everything to come together straight away. Though it is obvious that he has been working on things during the time off, and that's okay. That's encouraging.
You want to see a difference in him.
Chris Eubank Jr., if he's anything, he's a very good physical specimen. A guy with a very good engine, takes a good punch, gives a good punch, good speed, good reflexes. This is what he already had. And what I saw in the fight was more usage of the lead hand than normal.
Some trickiness.
I do want to see more of that moving forward. I want to see a Chris Eubank Jr. that doesn't just let the fists fly. I want to see a guy who sets up his punches and over time learns to disguise them.
You know, Chris ain't gunshot.
He lets them go, and you don't have to tell him to. But that's just it. When he's letting off those salvos, that might cause a guy to shell up, might cause Chris to waste a lot of punches on a guy's arms and gloves. I want to see Chris Eubank Jr. penetrating the guard. I want to see Chris Eubank Jr. landing clean, well-placed shots. A good jab, a good lead hand is the key to doing that. Not overly critical of Chris Eubank Jr. in his first fight after, 15, 16 months with a new trainer? Not critical at all. For what it's worth, he looked decent out there. And I don't think he's ready for the Gennady Golovkins of the world, if I'm being honest. I don't think that those are the kinds of fights that Chris should have moving forward. As odd as this might sound, given the level that he's competed at already, I think that because he's with a new trainer, he needs more learning fights.
To really break in this style.
Give it a little bit more time to develop some fluidity before he decides to fight against the world champion, some of these guys that are out there. But overall, not bad. Not bad. I wasn't expecting much to begin with, though I like what I saw. When it comes to the light heavyweight contest between Bivol and Richards, you know, Dimitri Bivol, the reigning light heavyweight WBA champion, he was facing a very similar situation to young Chris Eubank Jr. in the sense that he'd been out of action for a while, a very long time. Last time Bivol was in action was in October. His layoff was longer than Chris's. We're talking about 16, 17 months, something like that? I mean, essentially, it was the same situation for me to where I'm not looking for anything spectacular in a fighter that's coming off of a layoff that long. And what I saw from Dimitri were some of his tried and true characteristics, his laser jab, his speed, his accuracy, and his power. He's not as big a puncher as an Artur Beterbiev, and perhaps not even as big a puncher as Joe Smith Jr., but he's not pillow-fisted either. The fight with Richards was competitive. Richards, who had never been stopped before and was of generous proportions as far as light heavyweights go. This was a big guy for 175. Yeah, I didn't figure Dimitri was going to go in there and stop this guy. In the back of my mind, what I thought to myself was, you know, the Bivol people, they've got to be looking at this fight as an opportunity to get some rounds in the bank this year, because they haven't fought in well over a year. Actually, close to 2 years when they were in there with Lennon Castillo.
In October of 2019.
Between the very long layoff of Dimitri Bivol and the generous proportions of Craig Richards, I figured that this was a fight that was going to go the distance. I went into this fight thinking to myself that Bivol's not going to blow this guy out of the water. Credit to Craig Richards for looking the part, looking like he belonged, good usage of the jab, good movement.
He made Dimitri work for it.
Competitive in spots, though not really a hard fight to score. I can understand that there might be some of you out there thinking to yourselves that, Bivol didn't look all that great out there. Maybe it wasn't the best advertisement for him, though why would it be? He'd been out of action for 16, 17 months.
You're expecting this guy to shoot fire out of his ass?
Dmitry Bivol's not a big guy as far as light heavyweights go. I mean, he really isn't, Noticeable discrepancy in size between Dmitry and guys like Joe Smith Jr., Lennon Castillo, in this instance, Craig Richards. Dimitri's not a big guy as far as light heavyweights go, but what makes him a special fighter is his speed, reflexes, accuracy, movement, and athleticism. His boxing.
Throws really good straight punches.
Upstairs and downstairs, and there is some power there. Perhaps not as much as what you get from Artur or what you get from Joe, but once again, this guy ain't pillow-fisted. Don't let him chin you. I think Craig Richards gave a good account of himself, and moving forward, I wouldn't mind seeing Richards versus Lyndon Arthur, Richards versus Joshua Buatsi. I mean, this guy looked the part out there.
Interesting guy.
And they're, not bad from Bivol. Nothing to write home about, but I reiterate, why would it be? This guy hasn't seen any action in close to 2 years. You gotta cut these guys some slack. As things are starting to normalize, and these otherwise inactive boxers become active, there are going to be hiccups. There are going to be a few lackluster, underwhelming showings. That's okay. They just need to get out there, fight the fights, so that they can fight in the bigger fights. We then come to what I thought was the best fight on the card, the lightweight contest between Katie Taylor and Natasha Jonas. A fight that was just as well thought, well executed as I expected it to be from two very quality operators. I want to say that the look of the match was something to the tune of perhaps 7-3 to 6-4 in favor of Katie Taylor.
6-4 sounds about right.
Though regardless of how you had it, any round that Katie Taylor or Natasha Jonas, any round that either of these fighters picked up throughout the course of this match was a round that they really had to earn. I want to say that I had Katie Taylor picking up the first three with Natasha Jonas warming up towards the latter portion of the third round. The hand speed of Taylor was a factor. I think Natasha gave her a lot of respect in the early goings of this match.
Let Katie pick up an early lead.
And that's what Katie Taylor's hand speed does. It can be disarming that unless you're Delphine Persoon and you're prepared to take one to give one, Katie Taylor's combination punching, her flurries, her hand speed, it can be intimidating.
I warned about her salvos in my weekend picks video.
Natasha Jonas did warm up towards the end of the third. I had her picking up the fourth.
I think the seventh was her strongest round.
And the aesthetic of the match was a combination of Katie Taylor's hand speed, flurries, and Natasha Jonas's eye-catching punches. You didn't have to look for the work from Natasha. It was neat, it was tidy, it was clear. Photo finish shots that when Natasha did let her hands go, you noticed the power.
Though she did give Katie a lot of respect.
Thus, it was a combination of Natasha Jonas's eye-catching shots versus Katie Taylor's frequent flurries. A competitive match, yes, but a match where it's pretty obvious that Katie Taylor's throwing more punches. That even though Katie Taylor's not throwing photo finish punches like Natasha is, she is throwing a lot of shots. She is the much busier fighter in the fight. That takes me back to my recent interview with Natasha, where, she evaluated Katie Taylor as an opponent, and then, like now, from her amateur days to the professional ranks, Katie Taylor's hand speed really is a factor. I want to say both women looked strong out there, looked sharp. It's the funniest thing because Natasha Jonas was the super featherweight moving up to lightweight for this contest. Katie Taylor is the 135-pound fighter, the 135-pound champion, but Tasha seemed the bigger woman, perhaps even the stronger woman in the fight, certainly the stronger puncher. I think Natasha Jonas has opportunities anywhere from 130 to as high as 140 pounds. Lest we forget, at least 2 of the 4 world champions at 140 pounds are girls that moved up from lightweight, girls who moved up from 135 pounds to 140. Chantel Cameron of the United Kingdom, the WBC champion, and Christina Lenardatu, WBO champion of Greece.
Natasha's got opportunities anywhere from 130 to 140.
And in assessing Natasha's performance against the reigning undisputed lightweight champion Katie Taylor, she very much belongs in that elite level conversation, those high-level fights with those high-level fighters. Natasha Jonas has a home anywhere from 130, 135 to 140 pounds. I'll go as far as saying that I think her power would carry to 140 pounds because Tasha is a super featherweight of generous proportions. I figured that upon moving up in weight to 135 pounds, that would be a good weight for her. Her power would carry because of her physical dimensions. She's actually got a bigger frame than Katie Taylor. And with a little bit more meat on those bones, she might actually be a stronger, more durable fighter than she is at 130 pounds. I think the same applies at 140. Those girls at 140, those champions, most of them, with the exception of Kaylee Reese, who has fought as high as middleweight. With the exception of Kaylee, most of those women, they ain't all that big.
Natasha would fit right in up there.
But back to this weekend's action, this contest. It was a well-thought-out fight, well-executed performances from both combatants, but you could see that Katie Taylor is getting off, and she's getting off more often. That Natasha Jonas is firing some eye-catching shots here and there, but the flurries from Katie Taylor, they weren't far and few. They were frequent.
And that's what won her the fight.
Taking advantage of what would otherwise be quiet moments in the match and using those moments as opportunities to let off shots that, even if the shots are landing on the arms and gloves, if that's happening more often than not, that still makes Katie the busier fighter, the more active fighter, and the ring general in the eyes of the judges. Excellent performances from both, and congratulations to Katie Taylor and Natasha Jonas for an excellent fight. And finally, we come to the main event of that same card, the heavyweight clash between seasoned veteran Derek Chisora and Joseph Parker. Derek Chisora, who I feel really was hard done by those judges. I mean, there's no way you can convince me that Joseph Parker getting mugged from round 1 to round 12. There's no way you can convince me that he did anywhere near enough to have won a points decision. I'm not convinced he did enough to earn a draw.
There's no way.
Honest to God. If I felt Derek Chisora lost the fucking fight, I'd just say he lost the fucking fight.
I would.
But that's not my view of it, and that's not the view of a lot of people. Derek Chisora was the far busier fighter, the ring general. He starts off this thing by baptizing Joseph Parker in the first round. I mean, you tell me, how does getting pushed around and getting your midsection torn up by Derek Chisora, how does that win rounds?
Don't give me the crap about a tale of two halves.
Close fight. Close fight, my fucking ass. The only close thing in this fight was Derek Chisora playing Joseph Parker close and working his midsection. And when he wasn't doing that, he was touching him with overhand rights.
No way you can convince me Derek didn't win this fight.
He was man hard done by those judges, and it's appalling. It's disgusting. It's the last thing you would expect in UK soil. I mean, you don't take from Derek Chisora to give to Joseph Parker.
Which fucking sense does that make?
As if the aesthetic of the match isn't enough. It isn't crystal clear enough for you who's the busier fighter, who's the more aggressive fighter, who's the fighter that's got the other guy retreating, going from turnbuckle to turnbuckle. Let me tell you something. Joseph Parker got off a flurry here and there, but that was while he was on the run. He was being pushed around.
He was running.
His back, it didn't get on those ropes by itself. It's because Derek Chisora put him there.
And he really didn't let his hands go till the latter portion of the fight.
Ahead of this match, in my weekend picks video, I talked about how, Joseph Parker is far too polite a guy for today's heavyweight division. That Derek Chisora has his flaws. He has his drawbacks. Every fighter does. But I don't think that Joseph Parker has the killer instincts to put him away, much less contend with his aggression, because Joseph Parker, characteristically, is an economic boxer. He's a boxer who's boxing on a budget, as if he only has a certain amount of punches he can throw per round.
He's got no dog.
No mean streak, and in last night's fight, he was getting mugged. He was getting bullied. He was getting out-muscled and out-hustled by Derek Chisora, and it was obvious. Some arguments are just too fucking stupid to have. It's not a question of whether or not Derek Chisora was robbed. It's obvious that he was robbed. The question is why. You take from Derek Chisora on UK soil to give to Joseph Parker? For what?
Is this payback for the coin toss tantrum?
I mean, what's this all about? How do you rob the fan favorite on UK soil, who so obviously won the fight, to give to Joseph Parker?
I mean, what's the strategy here?
Tell you something. Somewhere, in some tall building, in some high-up office, Derek Chisora must have really pissed somebody off, because economically, This makes no sense. I mean, boxing-wise and finance-wise, it makes absolutely no sense at all to take from Derek Chisora to give to Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker's not the ticket seller in that part of the world. Derek Chisora is. But more importantly,
He didn't win.
Joseph Parker wasn't the busier fighter in this fight. He wasn't the ring general. He wasn't landing the more eye-catching shots. Derek Chisora was.
This feels like payback to me.
This feels like Derek Chisora has probably pissed off one too many people over there at Sky, and maybe this is payback for the coin toss fiasco. You know, Derek threatening to leave the show and pull out of it altogether if he doesn't get to come out last. This could be payback for that. This could have something to do with Eddie Hearn's departure, what could be his split from Sky Sports and his migration over there to DAZN. Perhaps the people over there at Sky know that Derek ain't gonna be sticking around. If Eddie goes to DAZN permanently, Derek's gonna go with him. One last fuck you for Delboy.
I don't know. Is Sky invested in Joseph?
At this point, it's anybody's guess because whatever logic went into this decision, it can't be reconciled. You're not going to convince me that Joseph Parker did enough to win this fight. You're not even going to convince me that he did enough to get a draw. This man was getting bullied, out-hustled, out-muscled, outworked, and mugged. Pushed from pillar to post. There's a difference between walking a guy into shots, creating space so you can see a clear target and nail it. There's a difference between that and getting bullied, getting pushed around. If Joseph Parker found his back on those ropes, it's because that's what Derek wanted him to be.
I don't know what the fuck happened here.
I just don't understand it. I don't know how many fights Joseph Parker has left on his Matchroom contract. I don't know that after this, he becomes a free agent. I don't know that maybe Sky Sports is attempting to build a stable in what could be the absence of Matchroom. Maybe Joseph Parker is a guy they're looking to bring on. Maybe Chris Eubank Jr. is another. I don't know. But there has to be a reason they robbed Derek Chisora. And rest assured, they fucking robbed Derek Chisora.
They're talking about an immediate rematch.
That's all well and good, but there shouldn't have to be one. This wasn't a close fight. It wasn't a close contest.
It's a black eye on the sport is what it is.
How could there be that big a discrepancy between what the fans see and what the judges see?